So for the third take on Spider-Man, they've dropped the big emotions, they've dropped the angst, and they've gone pure fun. So let's talk about it. So Spider-Man Homecoming is the latest take on Spider-Man and the first Spider-Man movie set in the MCU. Here, the main conflict of the story very much is Peter Parker's character arc. And in that, he's a high schooler who has superpowers, who very recently teamed up with the Avengers to battle other Avengers, and he's an immature teenager that does not know how to balance all of these and respond appropriately to each of them, and that really is kind of the central conflict of this story. Now, the main storyline involving Vulture is an outgrowth of the previous events of the MCU and the events that took place in New York City, and someone that has faced the consequences of much of what happened, has much angst related to that, and that kind of drives that storyline, but that storyline very much is secondary to what's going on with Peter Parker and serves his character arc, and that's really what we're invested in because the nature of the story they're telling is very personal and it's smaller scale. It's not all about the end of the world or cities being blown up like so many comic book movies today. No, it's a story about a person trying to understand how to cope with their situation around them, which pretty much all teenagers are dealing with. It's just a little bit more complicated when you happen to be Spider-Man. With all that said, I really enjoyed this film and I very much enjoyed this type of story being one of these big comic book stories that it doesn't have to be about the end of the world. It's about a person learning how to be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and the right villain for that type of situation. With all that said, let's talk about the good. Right off the bat, this is probably the most fun Spider-Man movie we've ever had, and there have been a lot of fun Spider-Man movies, especially the Raimi ones. And here the humor of the MCU is all firing on all cylinders. You got a lot of people that works nicely. And because it's set in a high school, it lends itself to a lot of more natural humor. You got the quips that you normally have in an MCU movie, but because it's set in high school, just the nature of teenagers, they're fun, they're quirky, they're weird, they make bad choices. And so you imagine what would a 15-year-old Peter Parker do if he had those powers, had the pressures and the trying to fit in of a teenager, combine that with he's got video footage of himself hanging out with Iron Man and fighting Captain America. All the weirdness that would come with that. Those are the situations kind of being explored in this movie, and it makes for a lot of fun. And much of the reason the fun works here is because of the cast of the movie. Tom Holland, I've only seen him, I believe, in the Spider-Man role, and just does a great job of being a new version of Peter Parker and a new version of Spider-Man that brings what this story needs. He does a great job for the story they're telling, for the Peter Parker that this movie demands. And along, you can just kind of go through the cast. Everybody brings what they're supposed to have. So, of course, Robert Downey Jr. in this weird mentor father figure, but he's still Tony Stark, so he's still a total jerk role. Plays nicely, as long as Jon Favreau is Happy Hogan in a different type of mentor-y type role, more babysitter chaperone type role to him that has a nice dynamic to it. So, of course, they're great. Michael Keaton's the character, the way he's used, it gets better as the story goes along, and where you see how all of it plays out in his true motives and kind of the way there's some twists and turns along the way that work really nicely, in that he very much is shifting between, you see a guy that can be fun and charming, and then he's terrifying because of the depths of where he's willing to go for the reasons that the motives that we learn in the movie to why he's doing what he's doing. And it's not big, evil, scheming, mustache twirly type stuff. It's all very personal type stuff that drive his motivations and his actions. So it works very nicely. But the real thing that kind of makes this thing work are just the side characters, not the flashy characters, but the best friends, the kids at the school have just nice, fun rapport, whether it's Peter Parker's best friend, the Michelle character, that just have these little lines that are very teenager-esque, very modern-day teenager-esque. The way teenagers talk today, like the Tobey Maguire stuff, that's kind of like this 1950s idea of what a nerdy teenager's like. This is very much the nature of teenagers, the quips, even the worldview that drives some of the humor and parts of it. That's what they're like today. Along the way, there's a lot of fun sequences and what you can do with the CGI, the action with the Spider-Man, just a ton of fun stuff you can do. And finally, talking about the good, the way this ties into the MCU, it makes for a Spider-Man story that you couldn't have told in the Raimi movies. You couldn't do this at all with the Raimi movies. It wouldn't make any sense. You couldn't do this with the Andrew Garfield films. It wouldn't have made any sense. But because they've woven it in with the MCU, the type of story you can tell is different because of the world that's been built by all of the previous films that came before it. And so you can build off that background and the characters that have already populated this world, the events that have already populated it, and make so much forward progress in the storytelling and the type of thing that you can do, and just have a fun story exploring Peter Parker and his tension, his journey, the drama within him, set in this world that we already know in ways that you just couldn't. There's no possible way you could tell this story in those other films, and you can be much more high schoolery because of the world around him makes sense for him to just be that friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that I mentioned before. So I really like the way they were able to take the angle of it, of actually a teenager exploring all this. And that's really the tension, the main drama of our story. Well, with that said, let's start talking about the bad on this one. And the first thing, it's not really a bad thing, but because they're doing this personal story about Peter Parker and his journey as a high schooler discovering all this stuff, the movie's not nearly as ambitious as any of the previous Spider-Man movies. The types of big emotions and a depth of exploring a death of an uncle and the weight of being Spider-Man and the deceptions that you have to tell and betraying everyone around you and friends that don't. Some of the big, heavy, weighty stuff that you saw in both the Raimi and the Garfield films, it's not really here. Like there's emotions in it, there's these explorations of it, but it's all handled on a level that's much more down to earth types emotions that we can all kind of relate to. Smaller type things of, man, I could let my friends down. Man, that was a bummer that girl doesn't like me. It kind of plays on that level of, oh man, I let my mentor down. That type of thing, as opposed to the big emotions that you very much felt in the Raimi films, especially parts 1 and 2 there. Along the same lines, I don't have big issues with it, and I don't want any of that to kind of drown this out. There's a lot of things about the way they handled kind of Spider-Man and some of the stuff you saw in the trailers with the spider suit and how advanced it is and all the gimmicky type stuff it does. It went too far. It's fun in the movie. There's a lot of funny scenarios in the way it plays out, but it seems so far down a path of like, do I really want Spider-Man's suit to be that super computery advanced like that? And the answer to that is a definite no. And so some of that stuff didn't sit well with me, as well as I like one of the things I really love about even the Garfield ones, but especially the Raimi ones, is they feel very New York-y, make a new word, but they feel so New York. And this one doesn't. There's some New York type stuff in it, but it feels MCU universe. It feels like, you know, that Stark Tower, Avengers Tower is in New York City. And so you feel like you're in MCU New York. You don't feel like you're in our Earth's New York. And that's some of the stuff I really enjoyed about all of the previous films, is how that New York camaraderie sense that it doesn't feel New York-y at all. And it feels like they try to leave New York a lot, as much as possible in it, so it doesn't feel like New York. And I think that was probably intentional, because they're going to the suburbs, they're going to Washington, D.C., they're set in a high school, and it just does not feel like we're in New York City. And I think something's lost in that, or related to what I want to see in a Spider-Man movie, which is New York City. And lastly, there's some Easter eggy type stuff in it about characters and reveals and who these people are, and this person shows up, that a lot of it doesn't quite feel right. It doesn't pay off as much as they want it to. And it feels like they're stretching to work in some comic book stuff that just doesn't quite fit. Most people aren't going to appreciate it. And the people that do catch it are going to be annoyed at the way they played it out. But overall, this is a really fun movie. I like this high schooly, character arc-y type take on Spider-Man that brings something new to the table that's different for the Spider-Man character, while being true to most of the things that we want with it and tying it into the MCU in ways that make sense. All in all, I think I'm going to give this one an 8.8 out of 10. It's a very strong movie, very enjoyable movie, very fun movie. It's not as ambitious as many other MCU films or even previous Spider-Man films that it's striving to be a best comic book movie of all time type film. It's just a very solid, enjoyable comic book movie. And if I'm being honest, I'm very happy they gave us a take like this. It's not an origin story. It's not trying to outdo the emotions of previous films. It's just a fun comic book movie, and I had a ton of fun with it. I think you will too. But that's just my opinion. How about you? Tell me, what did you think about Spider-Man Homecoming? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Get a good discussion going down below. Even before I did this, I was talking with Cody Leach and Tyler Tompkins about their thoughts on it. Both of them like Spider-Man 3 more than this movie. In fact, Tyler Tompkins said, compared to this movie, Spider-Man 3 is a masterpiece. He said that. So how about you? What did you think? What do you think about Tyler Tompkins' claim on that one? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Also, coming up in a day or two, my ranking video for all of the Spider-Man movies is coming up. All 6 of them. I've rewatched all of them within the last 2 weeks. That ranking is coming up. I'd love it if you chime in and give your ranking on that video. Also, if you're new to my channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button. I do movie reviews, ranking videos, but I don't want to just talk about movies. I want to talk about movies with you. So please join me in the comment section. I'd love to chat it up with you, and thank you for watching.